Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, my page. So this video obviously is going to be a very serious topic discussion on suicide and the holidays. As you guys know, we are approaching the holidays, two very important and very popular holidays in our society, including Thanksgiving and Christmas, and of course New Year's falls into that. Now this video actually was inspired by a conversation that I had with a guy last night while I was waiting on the bus. I was leaving my prac site out in Inglewood, and first there was this guy. He was a Hispanic guy, and he had told me, because we were like wondering like where the bus was at, right? The bus seemed like it was taking longer than usual, and it was scheduled to come at a certain time, but it didn't. So was like wondering where the bus was at, and he said, well, actually there's going to be a lot of traffic hold up. You know, the traffic is backed up because there was a man who tried to kill himself. He said that he tried to jump off a bridge out in Inglewood, and so that impacted the traffic, which is going to impact the bus schedule. And I'm like, wow, really? He was like, yes, a lot of, police and responders out there trying to save him. And I say, well, I wonder, did they save him? Did he die? Did he jump? Like, what happened? He was like, he don't know. That's the only information that he knows, that there was a guy who tried to commit suicide. And so then after he shared that, there was this black guy who was also at the bus stop waiting. And he began to talk about how he said that he lived in another state. He left California, moved to another state, then he came back to visit because this is where his family is at. And he said that he remember out in California one time, he was waiting on the bus. He was waiting on the train, actually. He was on a platform. He was standing there with another lady who was in a wheelchair. And then there was this guy, white male, who was dressed in a business suit, very professionally, very clean cut, clean shaven and all of that. And right as the train was coming, like the train was like coming down right there, it was perfect timing. He said he jumped out in front of the train, and boom, the train just took him. He said that after that, only thing he noticed was the guy's shoes, and I think he said the guy's hat or something that was just laying there, but his body was submerged under the train. So you can imagine that he did not survive that. And I'm just like, God damn. He was like, yeah, that's the reaction that he experienced. Like when he witnessed that with his own eyes, a man take his life. And he began to talk about how, it's pretty common around the holidays, which is pretty common knowledge within our field, that around the holidays, people tend to commit suicide. The suicide rate goes up around the holidays because they're thinking about their family or lack thereof. They don't have ties with their family, the connection. They feel lonely and isolated and hopeless. And lack of hope is the number one predictor of suicide. People say depression, but to be more specific, within depression, one of the symptoms of depression is hopelessness. And that hopelessness is the biggest predictor of suicide. And you can just imagine a person who doesn't have family. The holidays can be a trigger for them. They're thinking about not having their family there to be around. And it really triggers those feelings of sadness and isolation and hopelessness, unfortunately. And I've seen it, not that I've witnessed a person physically go out in front of the train, but I actually been on a train in New York City. This is like, it happens a lot where you have people, that's how they choose to kill themselves. They jump out in front of the train. And I've been on a train where it happened, where the conductor is like, okay, we're not going anywhere. Somebody jumped out in front of the train and committed suicide. And it's devastating because you're like, what in the hell? Why does it have to happen right here, But I mean, it happens, and it can be pretty shocking. Now, I've shared with you guys, some of you guys probably already know that within my field, I work in mental health. I've been in mental health for over how many years? Since 2000. Let me see, I graduated from high school 2002, and so I started my undergrad in 2002, and I've been majoring in psychology ever since and been working in the field of mental health ever since. And I've worked at many different mental health agencies, including psychiatric hospitals, where you see instances of people who have attempted suicide, people who have suicidal ideation. And I worked at a psychiatric hospital at the bachelor's level in Tallahassee and also at the master's level in Jacksonville, Florida. And when I was working in, when I was working in Jacksonville, actually, I did intakes at the psychiatric hospital. So I actually met with people who were just coming in, and I did the psychoeducation assessment to just get a history of who they were and the things that they experienced and things that they had been impacted by in life. But before that, I'm going to talk to you guys briefly about how I worked at the bachelor's level in Tallahassee, Florida at this psych hospital. And it was, see, some interesting cases, because this is the thing. Most psychiatric hospitals, they're designed as a stabilization unit to get people back to a homeostasis where they are functioning, they're okay, they can go out and be out in the world, and they're not crazy, bouncing off the walls and threatening to kill themselves or trying to harm somebody else. And so we saw a range of people from, who had diagnoses of major depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, paranoid, schizophrenia. It just ran the gamut. And I remember this one case very distinctly where it was a college student, white male, who had been admitted to the hospital because he had attempted suicide. But it wasn't successful by suicide definition because he survived it. And he had attempted suicide by hanging himself with a rope. So he had tied this very thick rope around his neck. He created a noose, and he fixated it to some type of fixture. I don't remember exactly. This was so many years ago, over 10 years ago. But he fixated it to some type of fixture in his house or apartment. I think it was an apartment because he was in college. And his plan was just to take a step off and boom, hang himself, and that was going to be the end. But it didn't work. It didn't succeed, and I find it interesting how and why it didn't, because number one, it's a rope, and I think if a person really wants to die, right, they're going to die. Nothing can get in the way of them dying. But it's something to be said, the fact that he survived it, is like maybe part of him didn't want to die. And maybe when he felt the rope tightening around his neck, he fought through it, and he got himself out of it, and he survived it. But either way, he survived. And I remember when he got to the hospital, and I'm working on the unit, because I worked as a mental health technician at the psych hospital, and I was talking to him. And you can see like the rope marks around his neck. His flesh was just eaten. Like you can see, the marks in his neck. His flesh was ripped open. It was all red, and his face was flush red. And, they put him on medication, so he was kind of zoning in and out. And just like, wow, this guy is a very handsome white male, But that's the thing. You cannot judge a book by its cover. I'm pretty sure on the outside looking in, and he was a football player, people are like, oh, he's a football player, he's in college, has all this going for himself, he's attractive. But inside, he probably didn't feel that way. He didn't feel happy. He didn't probably see that he had a future for himself, or didn't even care about the future. He's just like, if he was under obviously too much pain, and that's why people usually attempt suicide. It's just too much for them to bear. But he survived it. And I was at the bachelor's level when I was a student at Florida State University. And then I remember working at a psychiatric hospital in Jacksonville, Florida at the master's level, at this hospital off Atlantic Boulevard. I think it's Atlantic and University or around that area. I can't remember exactly, but I know off Atlantic Boulevard. And I was doing this guy's intake. It was an older white male, and he had attempted suicide by jumping off of a bridge. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And sitting across from him, it was a lot to take in. I can say that much. Especially, I was younger. I graduated from my bachelor's from Florida State University. I was 22 years old. So this was like right after that. I was in a master's program, and I was working as an intern. So I would say maybe around, I don't know how old, maybe 24, maybe I would say. 24 years old, 25. And I was working at this hospital, and I felt like I was still young, yeah. But, you know, I felt like I wasn't new to the game. So I had been exposed to clients with severe mental illness and exposed to clients who had attempted suicide. But just hearing this guy's story, I was just still taken aback because the way he was telling it, you know, was just like very matter-of-factly, and he was in so much pain, obviously, because he had just jumped off of a bridge. So they had him doped up with this medication to ease the pain that he was under. And I remember the reason why he had said he attempted suicide. Basically, he was diagnosed with hepatitis. And it was a hepatitis that leads to death, you know, like it was no treatment for it. Kind of like a terminal illness like HIV, AIDS. Just imagine like being diagnosed with like AIDS or something like that. He was diagnosed with hepatitis. And so while there was treatment for it, it wasn't necessarily a cure. And he didn't know how to cope with that. And he was just like, what's the point of living, you know? So that was his thinking at the time. And he went to this bridge in Jacksonville, and that had like concrete up under it, and just jumped off of it and fucked himself up. Man was messed up. He couldn't walk or none of that. He was jacked up, y'all. You see him like he had a neck brace on. He could barely move. Only thing he could do was really talk. So he was able to talk. He still had parts of his memory. He was able to recollect what happened and how he was feeling and everything. It was just a miracle that he survived it. And that's the thing about life, man. Life is a miracle, man. Because you might have one plan in mind that you want to do, but God and your destiny has a totally different plan. Now, where he is now, I don't know. Like I said, I was like 24, 25, and I'm like 35 now. So that was a while ago. So God knows where he is. Hopefully he's doing okay now. I don't know. But just thinking back to that story, I'm just like, wow. You know, and I don't remember the details and bits and pieces of his, you know, his history or none of that. It was so long ago, like I said, but I just do remember that glimpse of his story, you know. And then, of course, I've been exposed to in many other clients, you know, even now, clients who've had suicidal ideation, and you would be surprised. Like I said, you can never judge a book by its cover. You just never know. And yes, the research says that there are 123 suicides per day. 123 suicides happen each day in the U.S. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death. White males account for 7 out of 10 suicides, so that's pretty high. And I know some people may wonder, given the context of, you know, we live in a white supremacist society and all this white privilege, ask yourself, well, why are they killing themselves more? Granted that they are supposed to be ranked at the high end of the hierarchy, this social hierarchy that we live in. But they are ranked number 1 when it comes to suicide. And it's usually white males around the age of 50 who commit suicide. But like you say, you know, you can't judge a book by its cover. And people commit suicide for many different reasons. And it's not to say that, oh, just because a person is rich, you know, or they have all this privilege and status, that they're immune to mental illness. They're immune to being depressed or wanting to kill themselves. No one is immune, not even African Americans. And while the research shows that men commit suicide more than women, it impacts women too. Women just have a different way of going about attempting suicide. So many stories out there. Many stories of women committing suicide, feeling depressed and hopeless. You know, everyone has a story. I have a story. I wrote my book, American Dreamer, and I just can't wait to release it to you guys. I can't wait to be able to release it, to talk about it. It ain't even about the money. Some authors write because they want to make a profit, and yes, that's great, but for me, it's about giving back. It's about helping other people. That's also the reason why I started my blog. It's just to give back. I feel like I'm loaded with so much experience and so many stories that I just want to be able to impact others in a positive way. So that's why I really can't wait to release my book, American Dreamer. But I'm going to release it when I finish my PhD. I feel like I want to do that first, finish this program, and then around the time that I will be graduating, what better reward I can do for myself is just to release my story and get it out there and travel around the country and even the world to share my story, because I've been through some shit in my life, and while I've shared parts of my life, it's parts that I haven't shared, and some of you guys would be like, wow, I had no idea. That's why you just never know. You never can judge a book by its cover. You never know what someone is going through. And yes, African Americans are impacted by depression. If anything, shoot, I think depression ranks pretty high amongst the African American community. A lot of African Americans, even children, teenagers. I talked to you guys about my bout with depression. When I was in high school, I experienced depression. Depression is real, man. It's a medical condition. Even in a video, most recent video I made on Let People Be Great, you guys can go back and watch it. But I talk about, another episode that I had with depression. And this was after I had grabbed my bachelor's degree and I was, working towards my master's degree. And, I was going through some things, man. Going through some financial difficulties. Go back and watch that video. It's entitled Let People Be Great. I encourage you guys to go back and watch it. But I talk about, my experience with depression in that video. It's real, you guys. It's real. And when I was a student at Florida State University, I was a senior. I was working in this lab up under a PhD student, African American PhD student who is now a doctor. His research was on acculturative stress in African American males, and he looked at depression and suicide. And as part of the lab, my role was to administer these assessments to the participants who were male. That was his target population for his study. But it was just looking at depression and acculturative stress and suicide. And yes, the research shows that even African American men are under a lot of stress and pressure and are at risk for committing suicide, as some have already attempted and were successful at committing suicide. Meaning they successfully completed it. They did it. Because a lot of people who attempt suicide it doesn't work. Something happens, like I said, shared earlier, where it just ain't meant to be. So I only have, like 9 more minutes left for this video. But yeah, I wanted to kind of bring to people's awareness this issue of suicide and how around the holidays, it's true. Like the guy said who I was talking to last night at the bus station, at the bus stop, it goes up, man. Suicide rate goes up around the holidays because people are feeling lonely and isolated, and they see everybody else with smiles on their faces and all happy and jolly and getting Christmas gifts, and they're thinking like, shit, my life is fucked up. I don't have a family. I don't have the support, and that's another thing. That's one of the risk factors that we assess for as mental health clinicians, is to see what are the supports in that person's life. What does their support network looks like? And for some people, they don't have a support network. Some people have a really great support network, but that is definitely a contributing factor when it comes to depression and suicide. We assess for people who are actively thinking about committing suicide. We assess for the plan, the means, and intent, just to assess how serious the degree of their ideation is. To assess the severity of it, to see how likely they are to commit suicide. And usually, it's if you ask a person who says they're thinking about killing themselves, like they say, I want to kill myself, right? They've been thinking about it. You ask them, do they have a plan? What is their plan? And for some people, when you ask that question, they don't have a plan. A lot of people just don't. They're like, something I've been thinking about, but you ask, okay, so do you know how you're going to do it? They can't tell you how they're going to do it. They're like, I don't really know. But then some people can say, you know what? I actually got some pills, or I've been thinking about walking out to the ocean, or I've been thinking about jumping off of a bridge. I have this gun. They have a plan. So with that plan, that's a good indicator that it's a pretty good likely. It stands a good chance that person could kill themselves. Yeah, I know personally I have PTSD, anxiety, and depression. PTSD is another serious issue that's often just brushed under the rug. Anxiety, a lot of people have anxiety as one of the most commonly diagnosed mental illnesses up there with depression. And the thing about anxiety and depression, they go kind of run hand in hand. They're like cousins. So when a person says they have anxiety, another thing to assess for is depression. But you have some people who are kind of iffy or skeptical about asking a person, do they have a plan? Or asking a person even about suicide, because they think that in asking them that they're going to want to go out and kill themselves, which is not true. The research says that no, asking a person directly, are you thinking about killing yourself, or do you have a plan? If they say yes, it's not going to make them want to kill themselves. No. It's important to assess, to do that safety assessment, because you can intervene and you can help save a person's life. Is very important. But even as a therapist, as a clinician, I've been trained, and it's kind of popular. It's like a popular type of conceptualization to say that you just don't want to go and, on the East Coast it's called Baker Act, but on the West Coast they call it, especially in California, every state has their own name for it, but they call it 5150. So basically, when you admit a person involuntarily against their own will into a hospital to get psychiatric help because they pose an immediate danger to themselves or someone else, that's called 5150. But they say you don't want to go directly to that. You don't want to just get a person 5150. You want to basically see if you can assess, number one, how severe it is, and to see if you can communicate to them that it's important that they get the help. So if a person can voluntarily go in and commit themselves to treatment, that's optimum, as opposed to the therapist or clinician kind of doing this thing against their will and getting them to go in there. And it's interesting because I've been trained as a clinician on the East Coast and the West Coast, and they just have different laws. On the East Coast, it's mandatory. That's a mandatory reporting, but what I'm learning on the West Coast is that while it's an ethical obligation, it's not necessarily a legal obligation. So that's kind of tricky. Because, in my mind, I'm like, okay, legally I'm bound to report this as a mandated reporter. If a person says that they are thinking about suicide and they have a plan, but they're saying out here in California, like, no, a person, almost as if a person has a right to kill themselves, And it's not up to the therapist to admit them involuntarily to a psychiatric hospital for treatment, that you should try to encourage them to go get help themselves. But it is your ethical obligation. So that's kind of tricky, because it's like, okay, it's not legal obligation, but it's ethical. And even with the ethical, it still kind of borders on legal, because, you risk losing your license. So, and our license, I'm not licensed yet, but within the field of psychology, I'm trained to become a psychologist, is that you're bound by the state code. So, if you violate an ethical standard, you can risk losing your license, but it's not necessarily a legal obligation. So, you're not going to be held accountable legally, or you're going to be penalized criminally, but ethically, you can be. So, that's how it is. So for you guys who are watching, if you know anyone or even yourself is struggling with depression, thoughts of suicide, or you just need someone to talk to, you have anxiety, any mental illness, or just need help, just want someone to talk to, there's so many resources out there. There's so much help out there. There's 211, a national helpline that you guys can call. It's 24 hours. I used to work for it when I was working on my undergrad degree. In Tallahassee, in Florida. It's a great hotline. I can say that because I work there, not just because I work there, but they have counselors all over. Very well-trained counselors go through a number of hours of training to work with people in crisis situations. So take advantage of their free resources out there. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. You can call by phone, 211, or go online. I think it's 211.org, I believe. Check it out. They have numbers of resources on there. A lot of the resources are free or based on a sliding scale, meaning that's based on your income. So there's no reason why you have to sit here and be in pain and hurting by yourself. You can reach out to those resources and get the help that you need. I encourage you guys to continue the discussion below. If you have thoughts on this, feelings, or anything that you want to add, you have questions, feel free to comment below. And also feel free to share this video with your friends and family, because who knows, someone may need the help. But I do have to go. I thank you guys for tuning in. I'll catch you guys in the next one.